And just like we want our students in our classroom to build support and community amongst each other so that they can grow as musicians and as people, when we talk and open up about these vulnerabilities and especially when it comes to our mental health, oh my goodness, I could talk to you for a million years about all of the things apparently, but especially about mental health. When we're open and honest with each other about these struggles is when we get into these conversations where we go, oh my gosh, I've dealt with that too. And, this is what I had to do to get through. And, I tell all of my students know that I go to therapy. All of my students know about my alphabet soup of mental health disorders because I want them to know that you can go into the world and live life as a successful adult and manage these issues. Lots of us are doing it. We're all out here doing it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you knew one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. And now on to my next guest, Mary Kate McNally. Hi, Mary Kate.
Hi, it's good to be with you, Mark.
Oh, thanks for joining me. Can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Sure. So currently I am the director of athletic bands at Ohio Wesleyan University, which is in Delaware, Ohio, about 30 minutes north of Columbus. And that program is actually new. So I was hired in 2017. I spent a year stressing out alone in a windowless room about 40 hours a week and spending a lot of university money. And then in 2018 was our first marching season since the early 60s.
Wow. What division athletics does Ohio Wesleyan?
We are Division III, so very, very small. We have about 1,500 students on our campus in any given year. So yeah, it's a close-knit, small community.
Yeah. So how many students do you deal with there then?
Good question. So this past year, our second season in the fall, I had 44 students in the marching band. And when you include the students, obviously I do the basketball band also, and there's a lot of carryover there. Students who march in the fall a lot of times want to play during the winter season. But we do have several students who only participate during the winter and don't march with us in the fall. So overall, I think I'm serving somewhere between 50 and 55 students on campus this year, just in the athletic bands.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me. I taught for many years, about 10 years, at a small Division III school that really valued this athletics program, and it had a marching band as well, about the same size. And so I'm fascinated. How many schools do you come up with during the season that have bands also in your sort of division?
That's such a great question. So there is actually only one other band in our division, which is at the College of Worcester. The Marching Scott Band has a long, amazing history, and I super recommend people check them out. They wear full kilts and all the garb on the field and have for over 100 years.
Oh, that's cool.
Just, situation being what it is, and my program obviously is very new, but I would love to get to the point one day where we get to travel over to that game when we're away and have them come visit with us. It's kind of a longer term dream for the program.
It's interesting to me the way marching band kind of is hanging on or growing in these small schools, because we often associate it with the big R1 schools or the big land grant schools.
Absolutely. It was the first question I asked when I came to the job interview of every group I met with is, why are you starting a marching band at Ohio Wesleyan? Like that's, as somebody coming in that is potentially going to be building a program here, it's important for me to know why. And it was the conversation with the admissions staff that most sticks in my head, because the couple of admissions folks that I met with said, well, about 50% of the students that we get here at OWU are Ohio students. And, a lot of these Ohio students are really interested in having a marching band experience at their university, and we're losing out on students because of that. And I kind of, I'm a band director, so I had to kind of be like, no, you don't say. It seems very obvious. Ohio is, OMEA is the second largest state NAFME affiliated organization in the country behind TMEA. And so to me, it's sort of a no brainer. But I think schools, the more I've done this job, the more I run into folks, not necessarily right here in Ohio, but folks in other areas in the Midwest who are in very similar situations to me, who have been brought on by a smaller institution to start an athletic bands program. And I think it's a recognition that we have a duty to serve the whole student. And there are a lot of students from a variety of areas, zoology majors and psychology majors and mathematics majors, who I know would say that they would not be as successful as they are at OWU if they didn't have the marching band to be a part of. So I do think that smaller institutions, especially as the pool of students shrinks, and anybody who's in college education knows the recruitment and retention issues everybody across the country is dealing with. But it's important that we consider these holistic opportunities to educate students, like music making, regardless of whether they choose it as a major.
As I like to say, we're teaching music to people. We're not teaching people music. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, the thing that comes up a lot on this show is the sense of belonging that band gives a lot of kids. In a lot of places, band was their whole experience, their social experience, their place where they felt welcome.
Absolutely. That makes me think a lot about my high school experience. When I think about, even as I was just reflecting on my own life and how I ended up where I am and my early music making experiences, kind of preparing to talk to you today, I thought a lot about how my high school and middle school experiences are so defined by music making. It was the cornerstone of my education, even though I was obviously not majoring in or studying music specifically at that point. But when I think about all of the best memories that I have of my teenage years, almost all of them have something to do with band or making music, and the people that I met through making music. So yeah, it's something I think all of us who get into music educating understand, and staying connected to that community building is, I think, really important for us to consider as we teach our students.
Oh, absolutely. So you mentioned your education, and usually the second question I ask everyone is to tell their origin story. We got a little off track, so could you tell everyone now how you got into music?
Sure. So I was a kid who was singing about as soon as they could talk. I don't know what it is. My parents are kind of head scratching about it because they don't fancy themselves very musical people, although I think they have great taste. So I thank them for a lot of the things I was exposed to young. But my big introduction to music education, formal education, was my middle school band. I went to instrument tryout night and tried out the different things. I tried flute and clarinet, both of which I was terrible at. And it was my mom actually who suggested that I give trumpet a try. And anybody who knows anything about me and the work I do now will get a good chuckle out of the thought of 10-year-old Mary Kate saying to her mom, I don't know if I want to play trumpet because trumpet's a boy instrument. Is actually what I said. And couldn't play the flute, couldn't play the clarinet. And man, I got that nasty, terrible duck buzz sound you get out of a mouthpiece, and I was hooked. It was crazy. I just fell in love right away. I was in middle school band, obviously all 3 years, 6th through 8th grade. I joined the jazz band my 8th grade year. And then as a high school student, I was in the third, we had 4 bands at my high school. I was in the 3rd band my freshman year. And then my sophomore, junior, and senior year, I was a member of the wind ensemble. And working with Butch Eversole at Lewis Palmer High School in Colorado was just absolutely transformative and life defining for me. And I really got the opportunity to see that. I was home in Colorado for the holidays this past winter, just recently. And I went to visit with Butch. We grabbed coffee, and then I went and observed a rehearsal of his the next day. He was preparing his ensemble at where he's at now, Palmer Ridge, in the same district, which was a new high school that was built right after I graduated. He was prepping his group to go to CMEA out there. And it was so wonderful and affirming to see parts of myself in him and how he teaches. He's very goofy and tells a lot of jokes and makes a lot of silly metaphors and references in his rehearsals. And that's definitely a kind of the mood and attitude that I get into in my rehearsals a lot. And it was really special to get to share in that experience of seeing myself in a person that I admired and respected so much in my youth.
Yeah, absolutely. With my apologies for interrupting the interview, I wanted to announce that thanks to my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Travel, I will be attending the New Jersey Music Educators Association Conference next week in Atlantic City. If you're going to be there, please come say hello and maybe even become part of the show. I'll be hanging out at the Kaleidoscope Travel booth Thursday afternoon, February 20th, and for most of the day on Friday, February 21st. Look for more details on the Everything Band Facebook page as they become available. And now, back to the interview. I want to talk to you about this, and I actually put a note to myself to make sure we talked about this.
Sure.
Because I don't know, there's been so much comprehensive research that shows that the stereotypes haven't changed, that like the same attitudes still exist, but more girls are playing sort of non-traditional, non-stereotype instruments. But what I want to do is I want to figure out how can we get boys to play flute?
I've thought so much on this question since I did that annotated bibliography, because that when Abeles replicated his study, right?
Yep,
like that
yep.
was really the finding was
Right.
like,
Nothing's
people
changed.
people really don't have very different attitudes about this. We are seeing some crossing of this gender divide, but it's really that we're seeing a trickle of girls go to typically masculine
Right,
instruments,
right.
and really not the other way around. And I think it's I've thought about it so much, like over the years, and I'm sure I will continue to think about it and come to new realizations about it. But
It says something about the greater problem, doesn't it?
well, I think it says something about the way that these systems have a negative impact on everyone. And yes, that women, I mean, I'll be the first to talk about all of the ways that women deal with oppression and difficulty in this field. But I think that's such a toxic thing for our boys too, isn't it? I mean, what a toxic thing to tell a young man that an instrument that interests him and fascinates him is unacceptable because we have this very specific definition of what it means to be masculine.
Right.
And we've been doing the work, I think, of expanding the definition of what femininity can be. And I think we equally need to do the work of expanding the idea of what masculinity can be and what healthy, beautiful, sensitive, strong, right? All of these things, all of those can be encompassing of masculinity.
You know, the whole thing is, to me, it's like we have these boys when they're young, and I see it with the kids I teach. You know, I teach 4th through 8th grade, so I start my kids in 4th grade. I have kids flocking to trumpet and euphonium and trombone. I mean, the only instrument that they don't usually go to is percussion for some reason.
That's interesting. Wow. Count your blessings. Don't look that gift horse too hard in the mouth.
That's not true everywhere. Well, here's what's interesting is I start my percussion in 5th grade. I don't let them start in 4th. So I wonder if that doesn't influence the numbers. If that doesn't
I'm sure it does. Now, do you make that choice in the interest of like establishing pitch reading and melodic understanding in them first?
It's so I can get them to read music and to teach them music first. But more practically, it's because I don't have the resources to do it in 4th grade.
Oh my gosh. We could talk so much about how many decisions I made in my public school job that were not the decisions I wanted to make. They were the decisions I had to make because of the resources that were available to us all the time.
How do we deal with the reality of transgender and non-binary? Because this is really
such a good question. I think I think for those of us, and obviously I'm speaking from the perspective on this issue of somebody who is a part of the LGBTQ community, I identify as bisexual, but I would also identify as cisgender, right? I was assigned female when I was born, and I'm comfy with that assignment. And really the only way that I have found to even begin to have meaningful dialogue or thought about these issues, especially when it comes to including transgender and non-binary students in our groups, is to talk to transgender and non-binary people.
Right.
I've got a lot. Actually, I actually have several transgender and non-binary students in my band. This is you can include this if you want. This is kind of funny, but so obviously the Ohio State University band right down the road is known as the best damn band in the land. And it is a little joke. My first year where I had 30 students in 2018, 30% of my band openly identified as a member of the LGBTQ community, which is a lot. And my little community of LGBTQ musicians that students that I worked with as a master's student or people that I have met through conferences and other things, there's a little running joke that my band is the gayest damn band in the land. And we just had a conversation about this, about students signing up for our summer music camp at Ohio Wesleyan. And when we ask for their gender, and how do we ask for their gender, and why are we asking for their gender? And these conversations go really deep.
Oh, they do.
Really deep.
And they influence, we could talk about this in the interview. They influence decision band directors make when they go on trips. And this is a hot button issue for parents. And
absolutely. My master's paper at Kent State was on the twin bands there, which was in the 40s and 50s. They had a men's band and a women's band.
Oh, interesting.
And right. And this was, 20 years before Title IX. And so I did just a lot of, oh my God, digging through yearbooks and newspapers and magazines, everything I could find about the group and about the director. And the conclusion I really kind of best could come to was when you look back on it now, right, in the year 2020, and you look at the men and the women split of it, and the women had a separate uniform, right? Like they had a skirt, and the way that they did the drill was very, it drew the attention to the binary on the field, right? And we can look at that in isolation and go, oh my God, like that is so cringy. And it is. And also, in the decade of his work at Kent State prior to establishing the twin bands, there's this on and off of women being on the field, and then the next year they're not on the field. And then a couple years later, there's women in the group, and then for 2 more years, there's no women in the group. And the only thing I could really ascertain or logically conclude for myself was I feel like he did what he felt like he had to do to make in his mind as an educator. It was, I have these amazing women musicians and I want them to be involved. How do I do it in a way that people will accept? And this was the answer he could come to. And of course, it's important now to look back on it and say, like, well, we know better now, right? Like, we know that there's more to it than just men and women. We know there's a spectrum now, right? Like, we have all of this understanding. But man, at the time, this ties right into talking about rural teaching, honestly, making decisions that aren't ideal, but you do what you have to at the time with what you have. I think he was willing to do whatever he had to do to get those women on the field. That was the goal. How do I get audiences to accept them being on the field? And I think the way he felt he could do that was to put a spotlight on the genderedness of it. It's quote unquote 2 separate bands, but they always performed together. They never did separate performances. They were always one band. And so it was a PR thing more than it was his view on his women, I feel like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it strikes me a little bit separate but equal.
Yeah, and it's not good, right? It's not good. It's not good, and we know it's not good. And I can also understand at the time why he felt like it was the option he had to pursue. And we are blessed now to really not have to do a lot of the song and dance that he had to. to get these things done, right? And it's important to hold two truths, right? And to recognize that it's like he was clearly so focused and concerned about getting his women out on the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
And he did that. And his effort was imperfect. And we now have the gift of hindsight that he didn't get to examine that and go, okay, the next time we try, how do we do it better? And I think that's why we're finally starting to get into these conversations about when I'm taking a kid who uses they, them pronouns on a trip, how do I put them in a room? How do we do that? Right? Like, and we are probably going to make some imperfect decisions. We're almost guaranteed to. Right. We're guaranteed to make imperfect decisions. So, you know, it's part of the process.
Yeah, no question. It's fascinating. All right, Mary Kate. So I would like to try to find some use for some of that, but yeah, let's go back because you're saying so many wonderful things, and I feel like we're out of context, and I want to make sure I get to use some of these wonderful things.
Absolutely. Do you want a context for this bigger conversation about making mistakes as we try to do good?
Sure.
This is a good answer to one of the questions that you ask is, what advice would you give to your younger self? And I wonder and suspect that I'm not alone as a teacher in feeling this way, but a lot of the advice that I give to my students when they're in crisis is the advice that I wish I had taken. It feels a lot like I'm giving advice to my younger self.
Oh, all the time. All the time. Yes.
All the time.
Especially as a college professor.
Oh my God, especially, right? Like man, I got to tell you, karma, like that's a really inappropriate use of the word karma. Actually, it's pretty reductive, but the way that your own foolishness at the age of 18 and 19 manifests itself in your own students as a college professor is fascinating. And a conversation I have with my students a lot when they are in a moment of having made a very regrettable mistake. And this might be academic, it might be personal, it might be related to their health, it might be related to a family issue. But when they're in a situation where they really messed up and they're feeling crappy about it, the conversation I usually have with them is, I want you to think about yourself. With an 18-year-old, I use 5 years, older folks, maybe 10 years, but with an 18-year-old, like, I want you to think about yourself 5 years ago. And usually it elicits a laugh or like a grimace, or they make a funny face, right? Because, you know, being 18 and thinking about yourself at 13, like, you're going to cringe. And I'm like, right. And aren't you so grateful now here in this room to have learned the thing that you learned and grown the ways that you've grown between 13-year-old you and 18-year-old you? And they're like, oh my gosh, yeah. And I'm like, of course. And you should be. It's awesome to know that you've made that growth. In 5 years, at 23 years old, if you want to be able to look back now and go, wow, I'm such a better person. I've grown so much. I've learned so much. If you want to be able to do that in 5 years, you have to do stupid things right now. And it really sucks. It's super unfortunate, but it's the only way we learn.
Oh yeah.
And that applies, right? That goes micro right down into our own lives, but that goes broader, right, to the conversation about the twin bands at Kent, or to conversations about including non-binary students in respectful ways when we're making plans. We're gonna do things that are wrong, and we have to be willing when that happens, because it's not if it will happen, when it happens. We have to be willing to look it in the face and go, well, maybe that wasn't the best way. We should try something else now, instead of getting defensive or getting, it's very easy to be personally hurt because we care so much and we put so much intention into it. And then to realize it wasn't the right thing, it hurts. But it's the only way we can continue to grow and be better for ourselves. Look at those mistakes and be like, yep, that wasn't it.
I made one of my worst mistakes just 4 or 5 years ago. Just something that was unconscionable to me that I did it, but it was because I was in a bad place myself, and I was not of the right mind, and I wasn't thinking things through clearly. My priorities were misplaced. So it can happen.
And that's going to happen, right? The human condition is to be imperfect. We are going to make mistakes. And the question of the question really then is, when I make a mistake, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do with that? Am I going to learn from that? A great tangent to this, hardcore pedagogically speaking, marching band fundamentals, is I tell students, if you're learning a backwards move, right? Like say it's a pretty big step size and it's kind of like either a really steep or a really shallow angle, something that's going to be tough to set, right? Don't worry about if you're going to make a mistake the first time you march it, because you're going to make a mistake. You're not going to hit the dot. It's fine. We know that's going to happen. So take that anxiety off the table about if you're going to make a mistake. If we know we're going to make a mistake, can we make this mistake in a way that is productive? And the answer to that is yes, right? If I'm backwards marching, I can say, all right, I'm going to take the same step size, all 16 counts here. And I'm going to pick an angle and I'm going to commit to it. And when I am wrong, because I know I'm going to be wrong, I will be wrong in a very calculated and specific way from which I can make really quick, efficient growth.
Yeah, it's very much a growth mindset. I was just thinking about fixed mindset versus growth mindset while you were saying that. You know, it's very much a growth mindset. Putting that, you know, we don't have it yet, as opposed to we're never going to get it.
Correct. And recognizing that living in the present and working to improve the things that we think are important, especially when it comes to issues of equity and diversity and inclusion, living in the moment of doing that work is going to involve moments where we let ourselves down, or where we let other people down, or where we fall short of our hopes and expectations for the efforts that we make. It starts early in music, doesn't it? I had a fourth grade trombonist. She had a tough day yesterday. Just couldn't play the notes. Just couldn't figure it out, you know? Slide wasn't going where it was supposed to. She wasn't playing the right notes. Got done with the rehearsal, and, you know, these are 9-year-olds. I'm like trying to, okay, you got to get your lunch. You got to go to, you know, put your instruments away, line up. And she's like, oh my gosh, right. They're poking each other.
Right. And she's in the corner sobbing. And it's like, okay.
Oh, baby.
Yeah. So I was just like, you all go to lunch. And so I had to talk to her. You know, we had to have a conversation about, you know, it's okay. We all make mistakes. You know, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself here. Let's see if we can fix it. So we sat down with a pencil and we wrote her slide positions. And I say, it's okay. We can write this in today.
Right.
It's okay.
And then you know what? And then tomorrow we pick one note that we feel comfy erasing.
Right.
And then next week we pick another note that we feel comfy erasing.
Right. You meet them where they are, because
yes,
she had a tough day. But, you know, Monday, I think it made it worse because Monday she had a really good day. So she had an expectation.
Absolutely. And that progression is never going to be linear. And that's equally true, just like in that same thread, that's equally true on the micro, right? Of like, just because you had a good day yesterday doesn't mean that today is going to be just as good a day. Sometimes bad days happen. And then in the broader context of, you know, we are going to go through periods as a profession where we see a lot of triumph and success and things that we think are really hopeful. For causes that we care about. And there are also going to be times that we feel like, oh my God, we are stalling out. We are really hitting a roadblock here. Like, why are we not able to fix this issue? Why are we not able to have a conversation about this or address this? And like, you have to be willing to persist through that. Like, it's not always going to feel like success and accomplishment. It's not always going to feel like checking the boxes and getting things done. Sometimes it's going to feel like we're just making mistakes over and over and we can't seem to make it click. And if we're going to give space for our students and our classrooms to do that, we have to be willing to give space in our own lives for ourselves to do that too.
So Mary Kate, you began a story about your high school band director, or you began to tell me about it. We're going to pivot back to where we started.
Hard pivot.
Yep. Well, we have to. I got to get this back on.
I'm so sorry.
Track.
I'm so sorry.
Can you identify those qualities that made him so special?
You know, the thing that immediately jumps to my mind is things that I think about that connect, that I see myself in him. Is I remember a jazz rehearsal, my junior or senior year. I think it was my senior year. I was getting right. I was one of his top students, right? And I don't say that to brag. I say that because I was the kid who was going to go be a music major, right? Like I was that kid, and I was the first trumpet player in the jazz band. And I can't remember the context for this at all, but I had gone to the bathroom And when I came back from the bathroom, something had gone really bad in rehearsal. And for some reason, Butch directed that energy at me as I came back into the room. And I felt super blindsided by it and was like, oh my gosh, like I was just peeing. I'm sorry. I didn't know. Like, I just felt so confounded by it. And what I don't remember is the context of why that happened. But what I really clearly remember was like a day or two later, I was a Band-Aid in the office as well during one of my class periods. I helped with the second band and did library things and helped with rehearsal things. And he pulled me into his office and was like, Mary Kate, I'm just so sorry about what happened in jazz band the other day. I really was so upset about something that had nothing to do with you. And I ended up directing that energy at you and it was super misplaced. And I just feel really bad about it. And I'm really sorry about it. And I think the thing that I loved so much about being in band with Butch is that I've always felt seen. I always felt like a person first. And the music making was his gift through which he understood us and helped us to understand ourselves as people through music. I try to carry that into my work now. And there was a specific incident when I was teaching in Colorado and Deer Trail doing K through 12, that we were in a rehearsal with my band. And again, context I don't fully remember, but I was getting progressively more upset with them for not starting something correctly. And after about 2 full minutes of wasted rehearsal, we realized that the reason was because I was saying the number that I wanted them to start at was not the number I continued to tell them to start at. Right. And we've all been there. And I just looked at them and I was like, I am so sorry, everyone. This is ridiculous. This is totally on me. I am so sorry. You sound great for what I told you to play. And it's that I was expecting to hear something different. And we all had a chuckle and rehearsal went on. And my one flute player in the group that year, because I had 10 kids in the wind band that year in the high school band, waited a minute to pack up and everybody had left. And I was kind of sitting on my computer and doing things. And she went, Miss McNally, I have never had a teacher apologize to me for anything before. And she's 15 years old. How? I guarantee you at some point between kindergarten and sophomore year, somebody did something worthy of a quick apology. And I think that being willing to recognize our errors and our shortcomings and the places where we don't always meet the needs of our students and being able to look at them and tell them, I came up short for you today and that's on me. I think it helps them to feel seen. And I think I learned that from Butch because I always felt seen, even in those moments of stress, even in those moments of miscommunication. He was always making the effort to follow up after and to take ownership of his contributions to a situation. And for that reason, when Butch came down on us going, this is not okay, we need to be practicing, this section has not been prepared, we took it seriously because we knew if it was on him, he would own it. We knew that when he assessed that we were falling short, it was because he had really assessed his own teaching already. He always did that.
Yeah, creating that, there's a lot of things in there that good band directors do, right?
Absolutely.
Creating a safe place, owning your mistakes and reflection and improving yourself as a teacher. I mean, I think students respond to that for sure. I
think that's a shift we've seen from the podium too, as conductors in the past couple generations of conductors, in kind of moving from the sort of the dictatorial leader of the orchestra or the band to more of this collaborative conductor educator role that I think a lot of us are trying to fill now.
Yeah, I think that is a new thing. I had an old school band director in college in Northern California. He was kind of like a conductor who cut his teeth in the 50s and 60s.
Sure.
And he was very much the dictator, but I still have my notes from his instrumental methods courses he took. And the one he always told us, which is so kind of like anachronistic right now, is he would always tell us there's always fear on the podium. Either you fear the students or the students fear you. And it's such an old-fashioned kind of way of being a conductor, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, because I think the best rehearsals I have is when none of us are afraid of anything.
Right. Absolutely.
I think the best rehearsals I have are when we are working on a section that I know is challenging for the students, and the students know is challenging for me. And all of us are in the room going, here's the sanctuary in which we make our mistakes. So that when we go to the sanctuary of the concert hall, we can spare our audience of them to the best of our ability.
Right.
So that's something I think that we have made in the last, 50, 60, 70 years now, has been a big shift in that we don't have to lead through fear. We don't have to lead through dictatorial instruction, and that we actually get a better, more fulfilling experience for ourselves and for our students when we're engaging in collaborative music making, where everybody's interpretation and life experience is important to bring to the table. And this ties into what you said earlier about teaching people instead of teaching music.
He was a terrific teacher and a terrific band director.
I'm sure he was.
But he just had a very different way of doing it.
And here, right? And we are able to look at, I'm sure you are able to look at him as somebody who positively impacted you and say, absolutely. I have all of these wonderful yeses that I can take away. Yes, I should do this the way he did it. Yes, I should borrow this technique from him. And also, I have the gift of being able to look at the world we are in now. And in hindsight, assess the ways in which his good qualities can be even more amplified and even better represented in the classroom by eliminating those elements like fear, and to recognize that those shortcomings in his teaching don't distract or detract from all of the good things that you learn from him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And all of the good things you learn from him don't erase the value of assessing the things that it's like, I really don't agree with him about that. I really don't subscribe to that particular theory.
So Mary Kate, we are talking.
I know.
So I want to talk a little bit. Now, you mentioned that you taught at, and let me just make sure I got it right, Deer Park?
Deer Trail.
Oh, Deer Trail. I knew I was going to get that wrong. So just really quickly to kind of tell your story, you were an undergraduate at Henderson State.
Correct.
And now then you went and taught after that, or did you get your master's before teaching? You went and taught after that. Okay. So tell us about the teaching job in rural Colorado.
Yes. The 3 years that I spent as the music teacher for the Deer Trail School District, my responsibilities were for all of the students in the district's music courses, kindergarten through 12th grade. And the entire school district was housed in one building, and our enrollment, including our pre-K classroom, was, I don't think, ever got over 180 students. So when people talk about teaching in a small school, it was a small school. My third year, the largest my high school band class got was 12 students, which in fairness to me was about 25% of the high school. And so it was talk about a job where you are just cutting your teeth. I was doing everything. My course load was kindergarten and first grade general music, which was a half period length, 4 times a week. It was a 4-day school week. So kindergarten and first grade general music,
wow,
second and third grade recorder. 4-day week, yes.
Wow, and you were teaching second graders recorder. You are brave.
Listen, there was construction happening in the student center about a year and a half ago, and I would just leave my door open and like have my music playing. And a couple of times the construction guys would come down and be like, "You're welcome to shut your door. Like, we know it's really loud." And I was like, listen, for 3 years, I voluntarily listened. Like, I gave a group of 30 7 and 8-year-olds recorders, and I volunteered to sit in a room with them 4 days a week for half an hour and teach them to do that. So this is fine. At least the sounds you make are rhythmic and predictable. So kindergarten, first grade, general music, second and third grade recorder, fourth and fifth grade beginning band, everybody all in one room. And that was required for all fourth and fifth graders. When they got into middle school is when they got to start to pick. So I had a middle school band 6th through 8th grade, my high school band 9th through 12th grade. I had a high school choir class, which ranged anywhere from 2 students my first year to 7 students my second year, to getting mashed up with the guitar class that I also taught my first and second year. We like elided them into a rock and roll class my third year. So I did a lot of stuff. We all talk about wearing a lot of hats. It was all the hats, every hat. And I think teaching and thinking about myself as my own feeder and working in a community that small, there's about 600 people in the town, really influenced my thoughts on why we do what we do and what music education is about and the questions that drive me as a teacher. And in the last couple of years, I have really boiled my teaching philosophy and the question that drives me down to one question, which is really, do I want more people in the world making and appreciating music? Or do I want less people in the world making and appreciating music? And that's really the question that drives everything. It's not about, do I want more music majors out of my program, right? Do I want more students to go on to have successful performing careers? Not everybody is destined for that. But every student can be somebody who cares about and advocates for the arts and for music in the world. And that is really the question that drives me the most, is how do we create a populace that is more of those people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, right?
I would hope. It's very easy for all of us. It's very easy to get lasered in on the little things, right? On the honor band results that are coming out tomorrow, and on the horn players you're not going to have when you graduate your seniors next year. And like, it's so easy to get in on those little things. Butch and I talked a lot about those little things over coffee when I was home for break, and it was super helpful. He's in a big, well-funded district where he's had a lot of success, and he's like, even still, he's like, I thought when I left my little job that I would have all the instruments I would ever need. It's like, no, I'm still sitting here a week and a half from CMEA with 2 horn players that have like mysteriously disappeared for various reasons, and like, I'm still doing this. And talking about it together and sharing with each other about those and commiserating about those shared struggles made both of us feel better about dealing with both of them. And when we do that and share in those things, it's easier to step back away from that minutia and focus on, okay, do I want more people in the world making music, or do I want less people in the world making music? And making those the decisions that inform us.
As you were talking, I was thinking about the sort of the nuts and bolts of teaching at your small rural school. And I teach at a small Jewish community school. I have a similar setup that I have 4th grade beginners and I have 5th grade who are basically beginners, but they're in their second year. I only teach them 2 days a week. So my goal by the time they get to 6th grade is to have them be through the first method book.
Right.
2 days a week, we treat it as 1 year. You had 4th and 5th graders together. My big problem is my 6th through 8th graders is how do I differentiate so I can get my 6th graders to a level where they can play middle school music with my 8th graders. So you had 4th and 5th graders in the same room.
The question. This is one of those that like coming to this realization about how to be successful with my 4th and 5th graders all in one room. I had them for 36 minutes, 4 days a week. which is way less than that when we all sit down and open our cases and walk all the way down the hall from your classroom. And then it's lunch after that. And
oh, you had a lunch right after that. So yeah, it's actually
right
probably
after.
too long.
Oh
with
my
fourth
God.
Graders. Yep. Oh yeah.
The battle to be had. And it was all of them, right? I had flute, clarinet, alto saxophone, trumpet, trombone, euphonium, tuba, percussion, all in one room. 4th and 5th grade. And the only way that I could come to the important realizations that I did about how to teach that group successfully especially in my 3rd year, was to really be pretty unsuccessful with it in my 1st year. I did a lot of things poorly, a lot of things. My 2nd year was the year I realized that having 4th and 5th graders in the room meant I had mini teachers in every section. Mm-hmm. It was the realization that teaching a new note does not mean I spend 20 minutes going section by section. It means going 5th graders, turn to your 4th grade pals and show them how to finger a B flat for me, please. It means giving them supplemental material. Clarinet is the instrument at which I sucked the most as an undergraduate student. I was just god awful at the clarinet. It was the worst thing. And I think because I'm god awful at the clarinet, I'm good at teaching the clarinet because people who had to teach me clarinet threw everything in the book at me to try to help my poor sad self. And Ray Chappa's clarinet gymnastics was one of the things for those clarinet players specifically that my 5th graders loved, but my 4th graders got up on it too. That was really eye-opening in terms of teaching them skills away from the method book. For clarinet players, especially getting over the break, man, I'm not going to wait till Essential Elements or Standards of Excellence or whatever book I'm using is going to tell me to get them over the break. I just want to get them over it. Right away.
Right. Because, this is a problem.
And if I wait for them to be able to read all the notes, it's going to be way too late. So my favorite Ray Chappa exercise is going on the thumb and going down that F scale, starting with thumb F. And then hitting the register key and doing that exercise and getting them comfortable.
Oh, okay.
Covering all the holes, getting them comfortable switching between the registers. Did I teach them how to read all those notes? Absolutely not. Did I teach them to do it by rote? Pretty much. Did it make it so much easier when we got to the written concept for them to cross the break? Oh my goodness, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So not being afraid to get out of the method book to differentiate. We did chair tests like every 2 weeks. I would have done it more if we had had more time. But chair tests was everybody gets to share today how they're doing on their instrument. And we are all going to celebrate that it is a big deal to play your instrument alone in front of people and what bravery that takes. And no matter how well you do on this chair test today, don't worry, another one's coming in a couple of weeks. That was something I picked up from somebody I student taught with, but that was a big thing too, was getting them to be comfortable playing and making mistakes in front of each other, because we're going to do it. I have the privilege of getting to see the Cleveland Orchestra a lot. When I was a student at Kent, we got free tickets, and getting to see the Cleveland Orchestra a lot means you hear the Cleveland Orchestra mess up a lot. And the Cleveland Orchestra, those musicians aren't getting full-time salary plus benefits to be perfect. They're getting full-time salary plus benefits because they recover from mistakes more beautifully and musically and artistically than anybody else. And before we can get there, we got to be cool making mistakes in front of people.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. It's such a hard thing. I love your idea of using, the students next to each other as little teachers. I think that peer help, when that student says something, what's the fingering here? And you turn to the person next to him and say, help them, that lets you get more done with the group. And it also empowers some of the students,
Oh, for sure. I think we all know nothing makes you understand a concept better than having to teach it to somebody else. And so not only does doing that expedite the process of teaching for my 4th graders, but it also gets those 5th graders who are now, right, you understand, because then it's like, how do I make this worthwhile for them to basically have to go through the curriculum again? Because that's the way it's set up. And giving those 5th graders that opportunity to turn to their 4th grade pals makes them really think about, okay, how do I teach them how to finger a B flat? If their fingers are on the wrong buttons, what do I say to get them to understand the right buttons? How do I understand how to put my fingers on the right buttons, right? It gets them thinking critically about their own musicianship. And then it's also more likely to make them go, oh, I do that too. And I know Miss McNally told me not to do that. So I don't want to teach them to do that bad habit. So I probably shouldn't do that bad habit either.
It can lead to some pretty interesting conversations, especially with the middle school kids who are a little bit older and are able to see a little bit more of the forest instead of the trees. You know, we had one of my 6th grade saxophone players, you know, was asking about the fingering for B flat. And of course she's like, well, I want to do 1 and 1. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. Right. And so then
we have so many better options for that.
Right. So then it comes down to her and the 8th grader sitting next to her, like working out the various reasons why it was really cool actually to watch that happen.
Yeah. I remember once in my percussion, it was a guitar percussion class for 2 years, which, oh my God, that's a whole nother Oprah. We would need a whole separate episode for that. But one of my students was struggling with a rhythm. This was in the spring semester, so I had him for a while, was struggling to play a rhythm on her bucket because we did a lot of stomp kind of stuff. It resonated with that community really well. And she was like, I just can't get the 16th notes here comfortable. And having one of my other students very kind of eye rolly go, well, if your grip was more American instead of being so French, you probably wouldn't have to have this problem. And it was like, oh my God, they're teaching each other stuff. Like, and ultimately, isn't that the goal, right? They leave our classrooms. They go out into the world, and we want them to be able to continue engaging critically with music. And so as much as we want them to be good technicians on their instrument, it's also about making them critical listeners and critical thinkers. And in that 4th and 5th grade classroom, we can do that differentiating in that way. In making those 5th graders teachers, we are not only reinforcing the technical skills, but we're also getting them to think more critically about those skills and how they use them and how to transfer that knowledge to others.
So Mary Kate, about a year ago, you and several others, including Caitlin Beauvais, started And We Were Heard. And Caitlin came on, I think it was last February, to talk about it. And so let's follow up a year later. How's that? Can you re-explain the project and then tell people how that's going?
Absolutely. So And We Were Heard really was born of actually several conversations online amongst Caitlin and myself and some other folks about the difficulty of doing the work of programming marginalized composers when we deal with access issues like not always being able to listen to a recording of somebody's work. And there are so many complicated barriers that go into solving that problem. But Caitlin, being the incredible genius that she really is, had this moment of, well, why don't we just pair people up? Why don't we just get composers who want a recording and ensembles who care about getting more diverse repertoire in front of their students? Why don't we match them up together and have them collaborate on projects so that the ensembles can get exposed to more diverse repertoire from a wider variety of composers? And then that composer comes out at the end of the process with a recording that will hopefully get their work played more often. And a year later, we have seen some really beautiful success stories out of that. I think my favorite one is that Quinn Mason, one of the pieces that we have recorded for him, is getting its first international performance coming up here pretty soon. And he has seen such a boom of attention for his work from that one recording. And you are somebody who composes. And so I know you know directly how just one recording, just one concert, the right concert can mean dozens of other performances. And so I think Caitlin's vision, and she has really led us to executing this so beautifully so far, was to expedite that process in a way that benefited both the composers and the ensembles involved in the projects.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Anne Molesky, and I'm the host of the Acoustic Podcast, another podcast in the Muted Network. It's my mission to help music teachers be more purposeful, sequential, and joyful in each and everything they do as teacher musicians. Join me every Thursday as I share tips, tricks, and meaningful conversations with other music teachers about how to make the general music classroom more intentional and impactful for both you and your students.
Mary Kate, we
could talk forever, Mark.
We can. Let's get on to my final questions here.
Hit me.
All right. So, Mary Kate, I kind of know where you're going to go with this based on our conversation, but where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I think the question about healthy and unhealthy competition in music has to do with looking at the community that you serve and asking the question of if the competition in your program is helping your students and community to flourish, or if it's causing your community to stress and to fracture. I think competition, healthy competition, is a crucial element of any successful music program. And I think part of establishing that environment of healthy competition is about establishing an environment where mistake making is welcomed and celebrated and encouraged, and looking crucially and critically at our mistakes is encouraged so that we can grow. And I think that we also have to think about the way that competition can look different for different communities. With marching band specifically, this is always a very hot button conversation about competition marching band, right? And there are a lot of band directors now who are shifting from a competitive program to maybe more of a show band style program, or just more focusing on your Friday night lights than on your Saturday competitions. And I think it's very easy to extrapolate that those people are making a commentary on competitive marching band as a whole, when the reality is that those directors are making a decision about the students in the community in front of them. My high school program was in a lot of ways very competitive. We did not have a marching band. We were only concert band. But I went to National Concert Band Festival in Indianapolis twice as a high school student. We were very active in CMEA assessment. We went to the state competition every year. And at the same time, that doesn't have to be the way that competition looks for everyone. That served our community very well. And that would not have served my community in Deer Trail well at all. And so competition in Deer Trail looked like, let's have a jam session after school and see who can shred a lick on guitar on the new scale we learned today the best. Competition in Deer Trail looked like, in a band of only 12 students, let's go to honor bands and let's go meet students from programs all over the state of Colorado. We drove like 5 hours to one of the honor bands we went to every year because I wanted to give them that big ensemble experience. But that's what competition looked like there. And it was present every day. It was an active part of the environment of being in my classroom in Deer Trail, was that we were competing with each other to be better musicians. We were competing with yesterday to be better versions of ourselves. And sometimes we were going to succeed and sometimes we weren't going to fall short. But there are a lot of communities where going to BOA and competing at state. I mean, there are high school programs here right within 20 minutes of my apartment that their whole community, their whole town comes together around that competitive band show. Everybody's building the props. You got the couple of moms who are phenomenal sewers and are making the color guard costumes and doing the flags. And you've got the handful of carpenters in the family who are all getting together to build the set pieces. And that is a beautiful thing for a lot of communities. And it's also not the best thing for every community. Building the marching band program at Ohio Wesleyan was a question of that too, right? We're 30 minutes down the road from the Ohio State University band. And it would be foolish to model a Division III club activity ensemble after a Division I institution who for whom a large part of their concern is about national travel and nationally televised events. I don't have to worry about those things. So the way that I focus on competitiveness in my program is going to be very different from the way that they do it down the street. And that's okay. And there's room for all kinds. And ultimately, this all comes back to the question of, do we want more people in the world making music? Or do we want less people in the world making music? And if we want more people in the world making music, that means our band programs are probably going to look a lot of different ways from each other. And that's okay. And that's beautiful, really.
So Mary Kate, this is a really tough question for so many music teachers, including myself. How do you find a work-life balance in a career as a music teacher?
It's a good question. So part of what colors my decisions about work-life balance is to do with my mental health. I have chronic major depression and a whole host of comorbid issues, which anybody who deals with these kind of issues, and there are a lot of us who do, knows that these things often coexist. So I also deal with panic attacks. I deal with generalized anxiety. I do get seasonal depression problems. And I also have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So this question of work-life balance is really important because a lot of the symptoms I deal with involve fatigue, involve needing lengthy recovery times after long periods of exertion. I don't think that's unusual. I think all of us have elements like that. Maybe you've got kids at home, and maybe you have a spouse who lives in another part of the state or another part of the country. We all have these things that tax us. So things that are important to helping me find a good work-life balance is, number one, finding musical opportunities that fulfill me completely removed from the work. Finding a bar somewhere here in the Columbus area that I can bring my trumpet and go engage in a jam session with a bunch of folks I've never met before. That's fulfilling to me. So seeking those musical experiences. Number two, finding extra musical ways to engage creatively with the world. And for me, that really has manifested itself in the last 2 years in the form of crochet. I am a very passionate fiber artist. I taught myself to crochet following a major abdominal surgery that I had about 2 years ago. And it has been a constant companion to me. And I think it's important for us to seek those extra musical opportunities and activities and joys, because often the most important realizations I have about my work come to me out of the blue when I'm doing something completely unrelated that's still fulfilling and stimulating. And I got to tell you, that's not something I was good at when I first started teaching. All of my outside of work things were also musical. And I don't think that's sustainable. I think it's important for us to have things totally removed. That bring us joy and fulfillment, that are not so hinged on our successes in our work. The third thing that's been really helpful for me in terms of finding a work-life balance is to establish a community of people, both in the work side of my life and also in the personal side of my life, to establish a community of support, people that I can turn to when I'm struggling with something in my work, people who I can turn to when I'm struggling with something in my personal life. I am a big advocate of going to counseling and attending therapy. I would not be getting through the things I have to get through if I didn't have my therapist by my side, that third-party educated perspective to help me navigate some of the difficulties of my mental health problems. So finding a group of people to lean on and seek support in is absolutely crucial.
So Mary Kate, this is a huge question, and we've been talking a long time. What are the challenges facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
That's a good question, and we have talked about a lot of this, so I'll kind of sum up my thoughts a little bit. That's okay. Obviously, I am just knowing my resume and the work that I do. I think that we have a lot to address in terms of representation in the literature we put in front of our students. My high school band director, Butch, put a lot of wonderful music in front of me. And I also have looked back on my life and realized that almost all of the music he put in front of me was by white men. And Butch, being the wonderful educator that he is, has has really opened himself up as this conversation has happened about these equity and programming issues, has really opened himself up to this new world of, wow, there's all these amazing composers that I haven't known about. And I'm really excited to learn and grow as a teacher. He's been teaching, for 26 years now, and he's still out here acting like a student. He's still out here hungry for knowledge and wondering how to be better. So I think we have to do that work of representation in literature. And I think that student forever mindset is a big part of how we can do that work. I think a big challenge that we're all facing and maybe haven't fully addressed is that as music educators, we are a overwhelmingly privileged body of people. We are overwhelmingly white. We are overwhelmingly male. We are overwhelmingly straight and cisgender. And we are teaching an increasingly diverse body of students. Right. The country is getting more Black and brown every day. The country is getting gayer every day, which praise the Lord. And we have to face the very real challenge of how do I, as an educator who has limited perspectives on these issues personally, how do I meet these students where they are? How do I give them a quality education in which they get to be seen? Right? The way that I got to be seen by Butch. All of the students who come into our classroom deserve to be seen. And we have to make careful effort to be considerate of students who move through the world never being seen. And I think those two things are interconnected. I think getting more diverse music educators is directly linked to diversifying our programming. I think showing students of different backgrounds that this is a place for them. I think those are all connected together. And as I was thinking about this question, the big thought I kept coming back to was like, I don't know the answers.
No one does, really.
Like, I'm just one person who cares a lot about this stuff and knows quite a bit about oppression from some of the things I faced, and also is woefully ignorant on so much of it. And ultimately what that all comes down to is that we have to talk to each other about it. And it's hard. It's very difficult. These are raw, emotional, multi-generational historical problems that we're trying to address. And I think we are doing the work now of starting to talk about it at all. And I think the next step forward is being mindful of talking about it in a way that is productive and mindful of the contributions of marginalized people to that discussion, right? A lot of the, all of these conversations about depression and PTSD and all of these things, when we talked about the statistical likelihood of this, I'm statistically more likely as a woman and as a bisexual woman specifically to be dealing with those issues. And I fall on the statistical side of dealing with them. And because that is true, engaging in this work can be emotionally taxing for me sometimes. And because I know that that's true, I know it must be true for our Black colleagues to have conversations about race. I'm sure it has to be emotionally taxing. And so we have to start thinking about how do we engage in these conversations that balances giving space for marginalized people to speak their truth with also being mindful of the emotional labor that is involved in that. And that is a huge question, and I don't know the answer to it. But I think we're starting like a baby learning to walk. I think we're starting to crawl and stumble our way in the right direction, finally.
All right, Mary Kate, you mentioned this earlier, but it's the question about what advice would you give to your younger self?
You're gonna, you can bleep this out if you want, but you're gonna up, get used to it. It's gonna happen. You're gonna make mistakes. That 5 years advice, I say it to my students a lot. And the reason I say it to them so much is because they need to hear it. And also because I need to hear it, right? I'm going to be 30 this year. And it's important for me to think about, man, I'm so glad I'm not the teacher and musician that I was at 20. I'm so glad I'm not her anymore. I have come so much further than that. And I really hope when I'm 40 that I get to look back on me being 30 and go, man, I'm so much better than that now. I have learned so much. And if I want to be able to do that, it means some of the stuff I do now is not going to be very good. It's not going to go well. And so being open to and accepting of your imperfection and welcoming those difficult moments as opportunities for growth rather than as attacks on your person or as being diminishing of the good things that you do. It's about doing more good things because you're a good person who cares about doing those good things, right? And that good people do bad things. We make mistakes. I think that's probably the advice I try to give my students the most, and I give it to them because I'm still trying to take it myself.
All right, Mary Kate, this is one of the fun questions of the interview.
Yes.
If you had a choice, what would be the final work for wind ensemble or band that you would want to conduct and why?
I thought about this question a lot, and I kept coming back to the same piece over and over again. And I know that people are going to like hear this and be like, oh my God, so typical. And it's not even that it's my favorite work for wind band but it's one of those that I have a personal through line in my life for it. If I could choose the last piece I was going to conduct, it would be Holst's Second Suite in F. And the reason why is because my sophomore year of high school, I made the wind ensemble when I should not have. I was not planning on it. I was like, maybe I'll be at the top of the second band. Wouldn't that be great? And I got last chair by the skin of my teeth in the wind ensemble. I was thrilled. And one of the first big pieces I got to play with that group was Holst's Second Suite in F. And we played it several times over the course of the year, and we had a lot of good performances. And the first one ended just terribly. Oh my God. The piccolo and the tuba, like, were not in alignment with each other. And the last chord happened like twice. It was awful. And that piece, because it was at such a critical time in my life as a high school student, was the piece that I chose to conduct for my advanced conducting final as an undergrad. And as somebody who has moved more specifically into the niche of conducting and wind band literature, it's a piece I've returned to a lot in my life. You go to a symposium, it's probably on the list. I auditioned for doctoral programs a few years ago. It'll come up. It's a tune we get to come back to a lot. And every time I come back to that piece, I delight in the way that the music is the same, but I feel it and perceive it differently because the lens of my experience has changed. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be really beautiful and poetic to, if I could choose the last piece, for it to be that piece so that I could reflect back on the fullness of my life through the lens of that work and the trajectory of my musicianship and my growth. That would be really cool to be able to do.
Yeah. My favorite pieces have nothing to do with, they're good. They're great pieces of music, but mine's Irish Tune because it was a piece that meant a lot in high school. And the other one was that band director I told you about got cancer when I was in college and passed away.
Oh my goodness.
And prior to him getting cancer, he told us when I was a freshman, if I could have my perfect ending, I would conduct William Walton's Crown Imperial, then have a heart attack off stage.
Yeah.
And so then when he got cancer a couple years later and we played Crown Imperial at his memorial concert, it was just heart-wrenching. And that piece,
I'm sure it was.
Every time I hear that piece, I want to cry. It's like unbelievable, the emotion. But that's the power of music.
It is. And regardless of what a student chooses, right? Some students, a very select group of students are going to choose the way you and I did to dedicate their lives to this work. And the overwhelming majority of students are not. So when we send them into the world to do literally anything else, ultimately, I hope that we can send them into the world with that a piece of music can be so emotional and impactful for them, and that they might have the language to understand why it impacts them the way that it does.
Mary Kate, is there anything coming up that you would like to share or promote?
Sure. So just kind of a couple of plugs for what's going on with And We Were Heard. We've got 13 recordings on the website right now. We've got 16 projects that are out in the field, still getting work done, and we've got lots of scores on the docket. We've also got a commission opportunity that we are putting on blast. It's being commission being led by Dr. Edwin Powell at Pacific Lutheran in Tacoma. He's commissioning German composer Ingrid Stölzel, I think I said her name right, for a piece called Musica Ignota, and it's going to be drawing inspiration on the work of Hildegard von Bingen, who grew up in the same Rhine River Valley that Ingrid grew up in 1,000 years before she did. So we're really excited to hear Ingrid's voice through wind ensemble and through the lens of Hildegard von Bingen. And then the other thing I wanted to throw out there, especially for band directors, middle school and high school, if you're an orchestra or choir person listening, this is for you too. Ohio Wesleyan University this summer is going to be hosting our second summer music camp. We had amazing success with it last year. And because of the feedback we got, we are expanding it and adding a lot of things. So this year, instead of being only middle school, it is for middle school and high school musicians. We have a day camp option. So if you live close, you can bring your student in, or your parent can bring their student in every day. Or if you live a little bit further away, we do have an overnight option. Kids get to stay on campus with us. Again, middle and high school students, they get to choose a large ensemble, band, choir, or orchestra. They get to fill the rest of the day with electives like jazz band or a cappella choir or style classes on things like rock history and jazz and musical theater. We've got a composition track. We have options to take private lessons with OU music faculty. And of course, the traditional band campy, music campy, recreational things like swimming and board games. We're going to have talent shows that are going to feature the students and the camp staff and the faculty on campus. It's going to be a lot of fun. We also have scholarships available for students who are in financial straits and still want to come to camp. We're working really hard to make that as robust as possible so that we can include students regardless of whether they can pay their way. So if you're interested in learning more about that, the website is really easy. It's owu.edu/summer music camp. We can't wait to welcome students back to campus. We had a phenomenal grand finale performance last year with a world premiere of an arrangement of the Battle Hymn of the Republic for combined middle school band, choir, and orchestra. It was really special. One of our students did the transcription, and it was a lot of fun. So I can't wait to see what we do in year 2.
Excellent. Mary Kate, thank you so much for a really incredible conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.